Hi, this is E.S. Tilton. I'm here with Mark Hardman, this incredibly sexy artist who made the covers of my book, Foretold, Betrayed by Desire. And we're here to share the first chapter and the prologues of Betrayed by Desire with you here today. Prologue One. The dark pools of Ish's eyes slid with self-satisfied triumph over the 7 females waddling in. They moved awkwardly, some cradling distended stomachs as though the sheer weight of what they carried were a burden too difficult to bear. He stalked down the line of women, smiling in derision at the way they cringed as he drew near. Soon he would have his pawns, raised from birth, raised to do his will alone, not influenced by the weak, pathetic peoples of Lalentia, not raised to respect Kyron or his precious world. He spat at the thought of Kyron, his mind so engulfed in rage that he didn't notice the way the women gasped at the sudden movement. With a muffled whimper, the Glidarth's legs buckled, scraping already bruised knees. She froze in her struggles to rise when he stopped, an insignificant creature caught in the gaze of a predator. A low growl of satisfaction escaped his lips, the straight line of his blackened lips. Slits of animalistic eyes widened into dark pools moments before his hand shot out to grasp her ebon hair. He gave it a rough jerk, sending the woman sprawling forward onto her hands. Sudden tears landed with heavy splats onto the stone pavement beneath her head. But she didn't fight. She didn't dare. With an abrupt rake of a single clawed fingertip, he sliced through the fabric of her simple robe, bearing her scar-lace back. Tracing his claw lightly over the 2 largest scars, he savored the shudder of dread that passed through her body before pressing the ragged point into still tender flesh. A moan escaped taut lips, rising to a wail of pain as fingers dug into the indents which had once housed her wing joints. Music, his thoughts purred out with pleasure, and a lesson to all within his fortress. None attempted escape without paying a price, not even one valuable enough to carry his seed. Music, this time projecting the thought word into the minds of every subject within the hall. Ish's barbed tongue snaked out to taste the agony emanating from the Glidarth. His nostrils widened, drawing in the pain that hovered on the air like the sweet scent of honeysuckle in spring. Glancing up from the writhing woman, he embraced the look of sheer terror on the faces of the other females. Their horrified thoughts rolled in a wave through his mind, mixing with the Glidarth's, adding exponentially to his pleasure. He bared the sharp points of his teeth in something that was more grimace than smile. They averted their eyes from his penetrating stare, unwilling to draw his attention, unwilling to risk punishment such as he had doled out on this feeble Glidarthian land, he thought with contempt. Abruptly releasing the woman's shoulders, he grasped her long tresses, drawing the woman to her feet. "Stand!" His low, guttural voice was harsh in the near silence of the room. Tears streaming down her face, she staggered forward, catching her balance as he let go. He felt the internal tension of her trembling muscles as they cried out under the heavy load of her pregnancy. She would not be able to hold the position for long. No matter. It'll be over soon. His eyes strayed down her body past the mound of flesh which housed his seed to the trickles of blood that ran from her knees before returning to rest on her Glidarthian face. She had been comely when they captured her. His free hand moved in an almost caress across her cheek. She froze, terror racing through her blood. He took in her thoughts with satisfaction, adding to the dread by leaning in as though to kiss. Just shy of her lips he stopped, aware of the hammering of her heart, of the scream that raced frantically through her mind. She's nothing but a pathetic rabbit seeking escape from a snare. My snare. His gaze captured her frightened eyes, daring her to pull away while the hand which had almost tenderly cupped her cheek traveled down her neck. Her thoughts shrieked so loudly he was tempted to strike, to give her something to scream about. Barely, he restrained himself. She remained frozen under his hand as he ripped the fabric away from milk-heavy breasts. His rough fingers grasped, pulling at those breasts till she gasped out in pain at the pressure of nails against bare skin. Finally, he looked down. The tip of his tongue slid over the pointed edges of teeth as he considered adding more puncture wounds to the multitude of tiny dots covering them. Scars created with deliberate, slow pleasure as he took her the night he'd ripped the wings from her back. Living proof that she belonged to him, was forever marked as his. Releasing her breast so abruptly she staggered and almost fell, he walked across the room to stare down at the game table. 7 children. I've seen it. 7 to lead this world into destruction. My children. He was determined they would be his, determined he alone would control the outcome. As a twisted smile settled onto his face, the women across the room reached for each other's hands, knowing that anything that made this monster smile foretold evil. Glaring at them from under furrowed brows, he let his power move towards them, towards their unborn children. Would these be the ones? The others, they had failed him. Their short lives completely unworthy of his seed, lacking power or drive or even enough skill to survive the simple tests he put before them, most before they could walk. He frowned. Though the power allowed him to see much, he could not see the ones who would be his children, his pawns, his tools of destruction. With a sudden decisive movement, he scooped up the bits of colored glass on the table and dropped them into the stone bowl. No matter. It was enough to know that one day he would have them. His dark eyes shifted to the women across this room. 7 feeble lambs, one from each of the tribes of men, all with traces of the gift, but none with enough power to resist, all pathetically holding hands as though that alone could protect them. The corner of his lip lifted in a sneer. Weaklings all, unworthy to raise his children. No matter, none of them would survive. Time for this stage of the game to end. With a flick of his hand, all 7 women cried out, grasping their stomachs as an excruciating contraction sent them lurching forward, and amniotic fluid gushed from between their legs. Ishq strode from the room without a glance, leaving their care to the attendants. Within the hour, 7 worthless bodies would lie in graves, and 7 tiny infants would cradle within his halls. His 7, his tools. Foretold, Betrayed by Desire, Prologue 2. As the pink blush of alum blossoms blanketed the trees, the people of the Tri-Land gathered together for the annual celebration of the new year. Winter's fierce breath had come and gone in one long last blast of icy cold, taking with it the unfulfilled desires of the previous year. Life poured into the land with enthusiastic bursts of cheerful green, infusing the 7 races of Lalentia with joy. It was a time of celebration, a time of new beginnings. A kaleidoscope of bright-colored tents, booths, and people lay sprinkled across the petal-strewn meadows of the Unity clearing. From tent to tent and person to person, greetings and gifts were cheerfully given and received. Showers of petal drifted softly to the ground like fragile slivers of cotton candy confetti. Glidarts whirled through the sky in complex maneuvers, their brilliant wings mirroring the festivities below. Wagons bedecked with ribbons streamed into the clearing, bringing with them exotic wares from faraway places. Traditional favorites and delightful new flavors were sampled along with stories of the passing year's triumph. Bards traversed the field, carrying tales of long ago and singing ballads to the highest bidder. Lovers, entwined in gentle caresses, gazed into each other's eyes, renewing heartfelt promises of eternal love. Zarum, appointed seer of the Glenarth, took in the merriment with wistful yearning while gliding towards a wide balcony specifically designed with his people in mind. His festival-dyed wings pulled in as he landed with a running step. Although he wouldn't get to join the festivities right away, he smiled. Life was good, and the peoples of the lands knew it. He knew it. Jauntily starting towards the meeting hall, he checked himself in mid-step. A sudden foreboding chill grasped his spine. Numbness spread upwards from the stabbing cold towards his brain before he cut off the connection with who. He pivoted to stare down at the celebration that not only sealed the ancient ties between 7 races of men, but served as a gentle reminder for them to reconnect with their god, Kyron. A steady stream of traffic filtered into the tents for the various religious sects mingling with colorful pavilions carrying goods of a less spiritual sort. Zarum allowed his mind to skim the surface of thoughts, flitting from one group to another, searching for the source of evil which surely walked among the people. Nothing, no sign. Everything was as it should be. He shrugged broad shoulders against the pervasive chill before turning away. Perhaps he had imagined it. Long trips under the heat of the sun were said to addle the brain. Walking once again towards the meeting place, he stretched the ache of the journey from his wings. After the long trip, he was glad to finally rest them. Pulling pale green wings tight against the lean muscles of his back, he stepped through the low arched doorway, entering a labyrinth of caves. Arch-shaped openings, crafted in the distant past, led into the Seven's traditional meeting place. Their only adornment, time-worn, intertwining spirals of primitive design, invited touch. He paused a moment, allowing his azure-flecked eyes to adjust to the soft light of the torches flickering along the walls of the room. These caves remain as they have for eons. He ran his hand over the edge with appreciation for the natural stone, simple, mostly unworked by the hands of man, as Kyron intended. 7. He strolled past the breakfasting tables where piles of fruit, meat, and nuts invited consumption. His stomach rumbled its agreement. Placing his unity gift near an empty spot in the center, he savored the satisfying way the silver bowl, filled with exotic fruits, shone softly in the low light. Zarum stretched his aching wing muscles once again at memory of the extensive flight it had taken to gather those fuzz-covered delicacies. Moving at a languid pace towards the far end of the overburdened table, he gave the appointed seat a leery stare. As usual, I'm the first one here, he sent while seating himself on the cushioned edge. Guard that food with your life, Solange suggested. And you thought we chose you to head up the proceeds based on your negotiating abilities, came Lillian's lighthearted response. Zarm's heart raced in anticipation as he felt the teasing smile in her words. He knew better, of course. He hadn't been chosen because he excelled at negotiating. It was the year of the Glenarth, his race's turn to be the mouthpiece of the 7. Zarm shifted, uncomfortable in the formal high-backed chair, then switched it out with a lesser X-stool from the edge of the garland-bedecked cave. He supposed this is why they put the extra chairs in the cavernous room, since there were only 7 of them, always have been, and always will be. 7 seers sent to represent the 7 tribes of men. Sprawling content now in the low-back chair, he allowed his wings to fan open. They turned out fantastic this year. He admired the fine leaf-like veins that had been painted on. The unfurling spring leaf design was, without a doubt, the best he'd ever gotten. The expensive artisans who had forced him to sit for hours while they painstakingly dyed his leathern wings were well worth the extra dye rope. Even the brown velvet tunic and matching pants they had provided faultlessly accentuated the leafy design. A creamy bloused poet's shirt swirled around his wrists in loose ruffles, adding contrast and dramatically playing up his swarthy countenance. He flicked at the lace, watching the way the tiny glints of metal beads caught the light. Long, slender fingers, bedecked in glittering metal rings, plucked a nearby lemon-striped grape and popped it into his mouth. The curled grapes are sweet and tangy this year. He tantalized the latecomers, letting them feel the burst of pleasure he experienced as he bit into another one. It'll be a good year for wine if this keeps up. Zarum, you're making my stomach growl, came Clement's sharp reply. Precisely the point, my quick friend, he shot back sardonically. Best hurry before I finish off all the good stuff. Celestia entered the room at that moment, Lilium's petite hand resting casually in the crook of his elbow. Celestia laughed in a low rumble at whatever Lilium had shared, his amber eyes crinkling in delight. Zarum took him in for a bare fraction of a second. Bare-chested again, a tribal hero in the flesh, before moving on to Lilium's perfect figure. She, a tiny snow princess in an elegant bead-encrusted gown, sparkled white in the torchlight. What a pair those two make, Zarum's mind privately moved to the mistaken whispers concerning the two. Some believed they were to be wed. He knew better. If she leaves the seven for anyone, it'll be for me. Zarum's musings turned possessive. Celestia sat heavily in the seat next to him, his muscular, sharper body dwarfing the chair. It creaked as he leaned forward to take one of the petite curled grapes. He's right. They really are delicious, he said after popping one into his mouth. Leaning forward with a grin, he bashed forearms with Zarum in traditional Sharper style. How are you? Zarum's voice was rich and deep, the voice of one comfortable with himself. Celestia shrugged one massive shoulder. Pretty good, all things considered. Hard winter this year. Lilium seated herself with restrained poise on Zarum's other side, foregoing the Freni-Kyn kiss of greeting. Well, it can't have been too difficult. You seem to have had no problem hunting. Did you catch that one? She gestured towards the spotted cloak he had slung over the back of his chair. Lilium, like the rest of the Freni-Kyn race, held a high interest in clothing of all styles and types. A gown design based on the graduated spot pattern had already begun forming in her head. Remembering, Celestia reached into an inner cloak pocket, to withdraw a handful of tribal necklaces. Pointed claws gleamed from his own hunting trips and polished till they shone. Among them, a solitary necklace of triangular wooden slivers stood out. He plunked them down in the center of the table without ceremony. No need to tell anyone who the card one was for. Clement, a vegetarian like the rest of the Mahakru race, would never wear something made from animal parts. Lilium watched, unable to help but admire the way Celestia's chest hairs entwined the matching string of claws he wore around his muscular neck. Leaning forward with controlled grace, her delicate fingers chose a necklace from the jumbled mass. Knowing their primitiveness contrasted oddly with her shimmering gown, she put it on anyway. In turn, she opened a bead-encrusted pouch to retrieve 6 tiny vials. Among the Freni-Kyn, her people, scent was the most prized gift worthy of giving or receiving. Zarum watched the way her pure white hair swayed about her heart-shaped face as she placed them next to his bowl of fruit. Everything about her entranced him. Pale hair floating languorously, each delicate filament throwing off occasional sparks of light. Inch-long white eyelashes with tiny dots on the tips, resembling butterfly antennas. Full, peach-colored lips, all but begging to be kissed. Perfect, hourglass figure. At that dangerous train of thought, he hastily shut the speculative thinking down. He didn't need that type of temptation, not as a 7. Page 10. His mind shifted to his first encounter, the sheer psychic force of her passion for dance, and as though that hadn't been enough, the first time she walked in the room. Kyron's bells! Don't encourage her, Solange exclaimed. She already has a big enough head. Zarm shut down his mental ruminations with a mental jerk, wondering how much they had overheard. Lilium smiled broadly, enjoying the attention without a word. Men were drawn to her. She had long since grown used to the bombarding energies, even reveled in them most of the time. After all, she was an entertainer, first and foremost. Performers need an audience. That hers watched because of physical appearance instead of dancing abilities didn't bother her in the least. A spicy, sweet smell wafted through the room, rescuing Zarm from any further embarrassment by drawing all attention to the doorway. Stooping his angular form to avoid the low curve of the arch, Alarin entered. Exquisite specimens of Braille blossom swayed with each step as the Fravel man carried an overfull container to the table. Against the contrast of those graceful spiraling stalks, his strict black suit stood out in stark relief. The expensive fabric, its singular artistic touch, shone aquamarine when the light caught it. Clapping her hands with delight, Lilium leaned over the lime green spires, flashing them with a glimpse of her ample bosom. She closed her eyes, drawing in the delicious scent before turning to hug the Fravel in a rare act of enthusiasm. Not that she wasn't enthusiastic towards other people, just not him. All the way from the western Fravel reaches. Wonderful, Elrinth. Absolutely wonderful. Discomforted, Elrinth gulped and averted his eyes while his sculpted features reddened at the compliment. In a nervous gesture he was completely unaware of making, he tugged down the edge of his suit. His head jerked out a nod as though the muscles were controlled by someone else. Page 11. Stiffly striding to the seat next to Solange, he didn't bother hiding disdainful thoughts concerning Lilium's disconcerting lack of inhibitions. Lilium giggled, quite enjoying the perceived compliment. Not that she ever actually did anything with anyone, not that any of us did. That would mean risking death, or worse, insanity. Zarm's private mulling turned somber. Zarm shifted his attention to Elrinth, whose behavior mystified him. He's the oldest of us all, almost 60, yet he acts like an awkward schoolboy. Though he grasped that Elrinth had, in fact, the mental age of a 20-year-old with a youthful body to match, it still created a paradox in Zarm's mind. Zarm shook his head, unable to fathom what it must be like to live 60 years before being considered an adult. Why, the Fravel had been a 7 for over 15 years. He had already found and begun training his replacement. Guessing he did that because of the whole maturity thing, might not be so eager to release his seat now that he's come of age. Distracted by an intense itching sensation across his shoulder, Zarm's hand began to lift, but he checked the movement. The feeling wasn't his own. Jerking as though bitten, Solange reached up to scratch at the 3-inch-long ruff of banded hair growing over his shoulder. Unsatisfied, he turned to scrubbing his back against the chair. The strip of hair running from the nape of his neck to a point ending at the small of his back itched intolerably. The other shifted uncomfortably. Feeling the intensity of the itching he suffered from, they all resisted a compulsive urge to scratch their own shoulders and backs. How do you deal with it? Lilium's voice was laced with compassion. The spring molting would drive me crazy. He shrugged again, but stopped when he heard Lilium's thoughts concerning his well-muscled shoulders. Swallowing, he said, I brush and brush and brush. Would you mind keeping scrutiny of my body to a bare minimum, Lily? Page 12. I haven't got a replacement yet, and I don't need to take the mating temptation home with me. They all understood how he labored to avoid the single women of his home village who were trying to tempt him into bonding. His trips for a replacement had been fruitless. None held enough of the gift to be considered worthy of becoming a 7. Lilium nodded her understanding while the rest of the 7 sent out waves of mental discomfort. They hated the way these two races talked of sex as though it was the most natural thing in Lalentia. Though the Sharper and the Freni-Kyn held vastly different views on what was appropriate behavior, they were not opposed to sitting down for long, drawn-out debates on the subject. They heard Ephraim's mind before seeing her. Lilium found it reminiscent of water running over pebbles, and the others sent their agreement. She moved into the room on slippered feet, hesitant, silent, eyes shifting from turquoise to pale yellow in embarrassment at the comparison. Nearly as tall and lean as a Forveld, Zara concluded, and more strikingly foreign. Almond-shaped eyes outlined in varying shades of dark blue patterns created an even more exotic cast to her Wittrelk face. Though the blue colorations resembled inkings, he knew they were part of her skin. Her gown, with its deeply cut diagonal bottom edge and heavy overlay of iridescent beads, shimmered cool in the torchlight. Ephraima, that gown is perfect, absolutely perfect. There couldn't have been a better color with your hair. Lilium stood to give her friend a tender embrace. She tucked back the violet hair Ephraima hid behind. Cascades of overlapping pearl strands dripped from multitude piercings running along the outer edge of her double-tipped ears. Ephraima glanced for a split second into Lilium's face. Her lips rounded to a soft smile before her eyes dropped back to the ground. Of all the seven, she was the hardest to become acquainted with. Page 13. Even her surface intellect hid behind the natural shyness of her race, the Wittrelks. Ephraima looked towards the rest of the people at the feasting table. She started to move forward, then hesitated before finding some inner well of resolve. Gliding to the table, she laid a huge bowl-shaped sized shell down. Entranced by the liquid fluidity of her movements, they watched as she pulled aside the protective wrappings to reveal a bulky pile of shrimp. The crustaceans were easily as large as her long, slender hands. Her blush at their psychic wave of appreciation caused the blue markings surrounding her eyes to deepen, turning not quite black before fading. Solange slapped his muscular abdomen in approval as a loud growl of hunger went up from it, then turned to glare at Lilium. Spreading her hands palm up in universal how-can-I-help-it gesture, she sent on a tight band. If you don't want me thinking about your body so much, wear more clothing. He rolled his eyes at the ridiculous recommendation. What need had he, a Sharpra, of excess layers of clothing? I'm starving. Where are Clement and Marna? Marna's sturdy form answered from the doorway. I'm here, and he's late again. You'd think the race known for quick reflexes would be the first one here, and yet, every single year, without fail, he's late. Marna strolled with quiet confidence to the table. He shoved at the blonde, unruly hair falling forward over his eyes without thinking, exposing the high forehead of an average human face. As usual, believing that every day should be a celebration of life, he wasn't dressed for the year-beginning meeting. He wore the same sturdy clothing that he wore every single day, the blackened leather apron over a roughly woven shirt and pants, befitting his station as a blacksmith. Realizing that she had never seen him without the apron, Lilium wondered if he was hiding behind it, if the rugged leather links somehow made him feel more secure in his manliness. Marna's slate-gray eyes flitted to her face as he replied back on a tight beam of thought. I heard that, and no, I'm not. I'm plenty secure in my manliness. It's just comfortable. Instead of being embarrassed, like most of them would have been at the leak of personal thought, she smiled winningly and threw him a flirtatious kiss. No doubt Clement is distracted by butterflies or some other wonder of nature. Ellerin turned sarcastic, arching his stick-straight eyebrows. We are allowed to start without him. What say you, Zoram? Fine by me. Zoram gave a casual shrug of his shoulders. His rings threw prisms of light across the walls as he reached for the closest dish. Placing a small handful of the striped grapes on a simple stoneware plate, he passed to the right. They all began to fill and pass along while chatting over news from the Trilands. As they finished loading down their plates, Clement arrived. He paused in the doorway. They scarcely had a chance to take in his simple brown woven clothing and dusty oilcloth boots before he became a blur of movement. Too late, Zarum jerked a protective hand over his full plate. Clement sat with an over-loud, satisfied sigh, his platter piled high with food pilfered from their plates. Zarum removed his hand to see one lone grape lazily spinning in a circle. He glanced down the table. From everyone else, Clement had taken a small portion of their food. He alone had lost all of it. Revenge for taunting with the flavor of grapes and starting without him, he guessed. In the center of the table, a woven basket of cornuts rocked back and forth, Clement's gift. Picking up the remaining grapes, Zarum flung it at Clement with driving force. "Forgot one?" Clement's calloused hand shot out with amazing agility. Snatching the speeding grape from the air as though it were in slow motion, he tossed it into his mouth with a laugh. "I really hate it when you show off." Eloranthe gave a slight sniff of disdain while reaching for the shrimp plate. "Well, if you hadn't been distracted by butterflies or some other wonder of nature, you might have been able to stop me." Clement mirrored Eloranthe's stilted voice with precision, bringing muffled laughs from the rest of them. The serving dishes made the passes around the table again as the cheerful chatter turned to their own lives of the last year. Clement, the exact opposite of Ephraim in personality, skillfully drew her out with informed questions regarding her homeland. His plain, almost flattened face with its late-day shadow of a beard contrasted sharply with her long, exotic one. Ephraim couldn't help but be entranced by the gentle Mahakri nature he exuded, despite his cavalier entrance. She found his short stature and rough features, with its atypical heavy jaw and flattened nose, odd, even a touch frightening. But she kept that opinion to herself, having become an expert at hiding personal thoughts when she took on the mantle of 7. "Can I ask you something?" Her slim cheeks flushed to a pale pink. "Sure," he mumbled, around a huge bite of shrimp stuffing his mouth. "Why do your people surgically alter their ears to curl forward?" Immediate regret turned her cheeks a deeper shade of pinkish blue, while her eye markings blackened with embarrassment. He dug through his memory for an answer. "Actually, I don't know. Kind of weird and silly when you think about it. Not that any of us have a choice, since it's done at birth." She let her color-shifting eyes drop to her plate, appalled at having ventured to mention another person's body parts. Catching the embarrassed thought, he patted her hand with blunt fingers. "Hey, don't worry about it." She looked up at him with eyes gone from pale yellow to deep orange, as he turned the conversation back to her homelands for lack of a safer topic. Page 16. At the other end of the table, Solange fought the urge to use his shape-shifting abilities to mimic the variety of races represented around him. This was a perfect time to practice, but it felt obscene, in some vague way, to do so during the Unity fast breaking. Marna, picking up his anxiety, sent him a go-ahead, but Sully shook his head in disagreement. Practice could wait. The 7 were chosen from the different races for a reason. To undo that choice by imitating another race felt wrong. Instead, he imprinted his mind with the physical aspects of the surrounding people. Lilium, on the other hand, was unconscious of creating illusions of other hair colors as she chatted away. She did it habitually. Picking up a piece of green fruit, her hair seemed to turn that color. Sipping the purple juice shifted its shade again. Zarum, finding this little personal habit intriguing, had to pull his eyes away from her when his mind began going places it shouldn't again. At the other end of the table, Ephraim paused in mid-bite, looking up at him with stricken alarm written across her face. Though it would be agonizingly embarrassing, she needed to talk with the 2 of them soon. It was imperative that they find their replacements. As the meal drew to an end, Zarum gave the toast they had all been waiting for. To Kyron, may he rule and reign forever. To the 7, may they always listen for his voice. To the peoples of the land, may their prosperity grow. With this, they all raised their glasses in heartfelt agreement. The time to begin had arrived. Foretold, Betrayed by Desire, Prologue 3, page 17. They filed into the next circular-shaped cave where a symbolic candle and bowl of water sat alone on the bare stone floor. Unnecessary tokens, mere focusing tools for preparing their minds to receive, both from each other and from Kyron. Forming a circle around the items, their minds linked in unity. A wind of no visible source began blowing through the simple cave, and these same elemental symbols grew. In the end, water, fire, and air spiraled up to the ceiling, seeming to expand from the stone floor itself. The seven watched as time spread out in front of them and felt mutual surprise as the foretelling passed beyond this current year. A multitude of years stretched before them like water spilling from a basin. Their minds skipped along the top of the relentless flow of time water until they noticed a bump, a glitch, a flaw in the pattern. As their focus turned to this blemish, time slowed, becoming almost normal speed. In unison, their minds zoomed in on one singular future moment. They watched as an undernourished infant was born, silently witnessed the difficult labor and birth which almost ended before it began, gasped for breath as the birthing attendants fought to breathe air into its still small body, felt the fear-driven anxiety of its mother as she watched from across the room, owned her guilt as though they, not she, were the one whose lack of discipline led to this tiny one's struggle, were tossed around by the tumultuous wind of relief sweeping the room when the infant drew its first strangled breath, screaming out against the anguish of life pouring into undeveloped lungs. Time skipped, hopping forward in jumps of focus. The seven stood in silent witness while this handicapped child grew, in all outward appearances normal, observed the cruelty he was dealt early in life by circumstances and uncaring family, felt the curious twisting of his young mind by some malevolent influence, though none were able to find the source, noted the underlying oddity of view that left him an outsider as he caught up with his peers in size and intelligence, cringed as he used his uncanny insight into others' thoughts to his own advantages. Recognizing the seer gift within him, they remembered their own temptations, their own struggles with morality, when to use something which came natural, when to shut it down, when to ignore it. With growing dread, knowing in their hearts how corrupt he was, they watched as he became a trusted advisor for one of the rulers of the Tri-Lands. Time sped forward in a rapid jerk before slowing again. They gasped in shock as he slipped poison into the toasting cups of all but one of the seven rulers, his own. The seers fell to their knees in unison. An electric current of awareness coursed through those same rulers who stumbled to their feet after taking the first sip of the unity toast. The sound of goblets falling from hands gone numb disjointedly clattered in the seers' disbelieving ears. They lived the knife of pain cutting through bodies as the poison shot to the nerve regions of their brains, shared the looks of betrayals when the rulers all turned to the one unaffected king moments before life fled on silvered wings. The surviving king's whirlwind of confusion, anger, sorrow, and shock swirled through the seers' heads. Sobs racked their bodies as the man rushed to his friends, his fallen comrades. Soon, slipping forward in time, they felt these anguished emotions replaced with a burning, rage-filled resolve to find the murderer and kill him or her. They watched, tears streaming down cheeks gone numb with shock as the traitor was found, publicly sentenced, and executed. Page 19. Too late, the tainted seed of hate lay sown within the people's mind, its corruption spreading in an ongoing creeping tide through the midst of the lands. In a retaliatory strike, this same lonely leader, who had lost his best friends in one grief-ridden night, was struck down via a hired hand sent by the owner of the Red Pelican trading post. The owner's bitter joy at the assassination of the one he believed responsible for the death of his father was short-lived as he was forced into hiding. Death became the primary commodity as the first Assassins' Guild was formed from the dust of a business which had once provided goods to all the lands. Heartfelt horror filled the Seven as their once peaceful peoples were driven by revenge. War ravaged their lands, overflowing until Kyron's world, Lalentia, lay corrupt, spoiled, a seeping, cankerous wound. Heartache for this dying world and its wounded people settled in as time spread out before them almost interminable. A relentless, ongoing wave of anguished sorrow. They watched their peoples, their beautiful, diverse peoples, reject peace-filled unity by segregating into warring factions. Race fought with race, each one striving for an advantage, turning their natural skills and abilities to unwholesome use in order to gain the upper hand. People were mutilated, slaughtered, en masse as well as individually for no better reason than the shape of their ear or the color of their bodies. They grieved anew when the perverse lives of their peoples mutated their very genes, changing the races into tainted, gray shadows of their former life-filled glory. The Mahakru, once altruistic, peaceful nature lovers, turned their natural ability of speed to the art of war. Deliberate inbreeding, as mercenaries, have the unexpected liability of instilling cruelty into the bloodlines of their peoples. Eventually, without the ability to do even the most menial labor, they turned to capturing their opponents as slaves, tying the very people they sought to eliminate to their survival. Page 20. The Sharpra, natural hunters, became barbarically tribalistic, warring amongst themselves as well as with anyone who dared approach villages. After incessant infighting dangerously reduced their numbers, laws were enacted to help stop this spiraling downward decline. They learned to use their shape-shifting abilities to infiltrate the rest of the lands using stealth and deception to expose valuable information. Loyalty to their own people became the single most driving force in their behavior, causing supernatural ties with their mates. The Freni-Kyn, fun-loving entertainers with an Achilles heel and the very hair that made them unique, were nearly wiped out until they turned to the one form of entertainment that could help them survive: prostitution. Restructuring of their whole society so that only those who excelled in this form of entertainment were allowed to mate or given political influence caused their bodies to change, mutate, over the passage of time. They became the living physical standard of the people's preferred beauty. Lacking emotional closeness, even with each other, a driving need to fill this emptiness with unending sexual partners became prevalent. With birth rates climbing at an alarming rate, they sought means to control when and who gave birth, leading to the curse of the Prologue cycle and the Prologue sickness. The Watruk, a reclusive water people with a willingness to help the other races through overseas trade, shut down the water lanes, refusing passage to outsiders, and closed themselves off even further from the other races. Their land-bound cities, abandoned for the safety of the ocean, became islands of interconnected watercraft, a motley mass of boats, ships, and rafts. Eventually, the other races built their own vessels, causing splintering within the Watruk society. Out of this disagreement, the Watruk pirates were birthed, a vicious group of killers who, determined to jealously protect the seas from invasion, turned to trafficking in drugs and slavery with the Mahakru and others of low honor. The Gledarth, free-spirited traders and metalsmiths, refused to give metals to the other races after mutilation of their wings became prevalent among the warring factions. Withdrawing to their mountaintop fortified megatropolis, they became isolated, turning in upon themselves. Sorrow at this restriction of their freedom turned them to the fixated comfort of food. Gluttony restricted the use of flight even further, leading in turn to overwhelming urges towards self-mutilation and suicide. The Fravel, without muscular stature to ensure their survival during the wars, withdrew to distant, secluded cities. They became negotiators, using their superior age and knowledge to help others govern the lands. Their laws multiplied, becoming so redundant as to be useless, a dagger to their own throats. Eventually, it became impossible for them to accomplish anything of significance. Society stagnated, technology drew to a crawl, and a people once known for its ingenious, conceptual inventions left off creating, with one exception. Their knowledge of genetics played a heavy hand in the inbreeding techniques taken on by the Mahakru and the Freni-Kyn. And humankind? Well, the humans simply multiplied and roared and imbibed in the perversions infecting all the races, accepting every sordid atrocity, till their towns became as varied as the individual races. Some few, outraged by the barbarianism, left for isolated areas, creating pockets of strange, ingrown societies based around the principles of science, religion, technology, and magic, each pursuing these interests without regard for the consequences. The scene shifted forward again. Finally, after foreseeing the horrifying debasement of their peoples throughout time, a collective sigh of relief escaped their lips. Another child was born, the face, the race, the very sex, vague, smudged, oddly shadowed, as though open to chance, to change, to some shifting, unforeseeable facts. This one, this tiny, hazy infant, destined to bring unity, to heal the ragged wounds of their peoples. Unity spread in a silken wave through the land once again, as a result of one birthing. All of this, all the calamity, all the hope, depended upon one thing, one birthing. One birthing would begin the rage wars. One birthing would restore unity. You ready? Prologue 4, Betrayed by Desire. The fire, water, and wind abruptly ceased spiraling. Zara, his mind the central focus of energy, fell to the floor in psychic shock. The rest of the seven staggered to him when his mind ceased, grief spurring anew. Finding his body alive, they wrapped their arms around him in mourning till his thoughts joined theirs again. Lying in a jumbled heap on the cold stone floor, the seven wept for their peoples and the monstrous evil looming before the Lyncha. Outside, unaware of the grieving hearts of their prophets, or of the malevolent changes that lay ahead, the seven great tribes of Kyron continued in merriment. As the new day dawned, the seven forced themselves into partaking of a feast which had been carried into the adjoining room while the seer stood transfixed by the overwhelming vision. The ash of their grief flavored the now cold food, drowning out its wholesome goodness. It didn't matter. They devoured the food as fast as they could shove it in. Their bodies required the renewing energy after the overload of psychic power spent the day before. Never had they heard of a foretelling lasting beyond the next year's events. The debilitating toll it exacted on their bodies left their limbs shaking with weakness. Marna spoke aloud. We're supposed to emerge with next year's planting recommendations and Chiron's blessings, not with this. Cursing, the word rang through their minds in heavy mutual. Yes, cursing, and yet not one, a warning and a promise of hope. Solange's speculations felt oddly convoluted. Their minds linked once more. Marna answered Zaram's thoughts. Agreed. We can't tell the people about this. If we were supposed to change history, we'd have seen how to do it. William's mental voice held deep sadness. So, what do we tell them then? Elorant's normally crisp thoughts were soft, hesitant. We give them hope, Ephraim sent decisively. A foretelling of hope, the seven enjoined, none able to tell who initiated the idea. They remained sequestered all day, sending out for food when necessary and raising the concerned eyebrows of the outside helpers. Never before had the prophecy been postponed. Already things changed, despite our desire to keep it the same, William sensed. Silently they worded their foretelling. When the time of unity came again to the lands, it would be recognized. Their cryptic words might very well be what saved the lives of the unity bearers. By their very decision to hide the truth, they signed a death sentence to their own prestigious calling of seven. In the end, the seven would exist in stealthy secret, a memory only. When they emerged the next day, Zarum stood on the announcement platform with the seven tribe leaders. Afraid of making eye contact, he stared out over the heads of the people and gave the cryptic foretelling without speaking of next year's weather, then followed with the customary year-beginning blessings. The rulers glanced questioningly at each other before lifting their cups and toasts to these cryptic words, none of them understanding the meaning. Afterwards, people milled about in confusion, unsure to what to think of their seer's odd behavior. A multitude of years came and went. The calling of seven took on a mysterious, dark aspect. Knowing what storm lay brewing, the choosing of a predecessor became a laborious process. Page 24. Each year the peoples of the Tri-Land area were given the same exact foretelling along with a blessing. It came to be expected, though the seven refused to explain themselves. The seven who had witnessed the alarming vision moved on with their much-altered lives, but not before leaving an accounting of the events they had seen and precise instructions with the next seven, who in turn sent it on to the seers who followed them. Initiation into the calling of seven required a reliving of the vision through the memory of their predecessors and the written accounts. Sickened at the vision almost from the moment of accepting their calling, the seers who followed continued repeating the foretelling in grim determination. The races could not be allowed the luxury of forgetting this prophecy. It must be told, it must be made indelible in the minds of Kyron's peoples. When the long-expected day of betrayal arrived 253 years later, the seven of that time were executed for not warning the rulers. They had foreseen their own deaths at the previous year's celebration and set in place what was needed to care for their families, as well as passed on the mantle of sight. The foretelling became a distant memory to most of the races of Kyron, as the seven were forced into hiding. Prologue 5 of Foretold, Betrayed by Desire. Lanyon tossed back a Mohawk whiskey before ordering another round. He smiled, leaning forward to give the curvaceous beauty a quick kiss. Soon he would be drunk enough to bed the auburn-haired woman without recourse. Laughing, she pressed up against him, enjoying more kisses. My dear, don't you smell delicious? But not yet. Lanyon grasped her waist and spun her towards the far wall. A quick game of dags should suffice. Not time yet, just a few more drinks. A wave of pure passion passed over Ariancha. She rolled onto her back with a disgusted groan. Oh, not again. Before stopping the scene, she caught a glimpse of the woman Lanyon was currently bedding, felt Lanyon's lust intensify as his hands pulled on the woman's corset strings. She slammed down the sending without bothering to give Lanyon an angry response. It was pointless. He was, of course, drunk, or he wouldn't be bedding the woman at all. Page 26. Kyron, damn the man. He's been subjecting me to this ever since puberty, and enough is enough. He needs to find his replacement before he drives me crazy. Sending out a tentative probe to find out if any of the other seers had been awakened, she found herself alone. No doubt they still slumbered. Her proximity to the area Lanyon lived in had always made her more susceptible to his unseemly sendings. Sighing, she pulled a book free from the nearest shelf. She would need to bore herself back to sleep and hope her shields held. Page 27 of Kyron's Worlde. Foretold, Betrayed by Desire, Chapter 1. 2,658 years after betrayal. Soft rays of light from the double moon slanted in through large paned windows, painting the nearly bare room in shades of romantic pink. Zark's hands rubbed absent-mindedly across his bare abdomen, smearing the blood which coated it. His breathing slowed as the scent of raw meat filled his nostrils. A satisfied smile lifted the corners of his lips. He massaged the slick red spatters into his pale skin like soothing balm as he considered the bloody mass before him. Kyra, no one will recognize you now. He blinked, frowned, and shook his head, causing waving filaments of white hair to sway and dance with sparkling radiance in the diffused lighting. No, not Kyra, human. This one's merely human, unworthy of comparison with that thrice-bedamned witch. A poor substitute at best. He took in the short blonde hair and hourglass figure without remorse. She shouldn't have reminded me of her fault. A mask of hate marred his perfect Freni-Kyn features as he thought about Kyra and what she had done. Almost without noticing, he slashed the human's cheek with retractable claws, adding to the myriad of shallow cuts lacing her body. Fresh blood welled up to mix with the older, darker blood covering her still form. He frowned. Not enough life in her to be worth playing with now. Probably dead within the day. So, page 28. A single claw traced the smooth line of his pointed jawline as a sneer touched the rounded fullness of his lips. Perhaps one more bit of sport, something she'll wake up for. One last delicious moment of agony. He gathered the broken body into his arms almost tenderly and carried her from the luxurious hunting lodge. The muffled noise of burdened steps as he disturbed the thick layer of undergrowth was the only sound as he tramped through the woods. Even the animals waited, or seemed to. His eyes shifted warily from shadow to shadow, watching for the telling signs of moonlight shivering off the hungry gleam of a wolf's eye. The scent of fresh blood which wrapped them like a cloak made these hunting grounds dangerous. He shrugged. Worth it, though. Well worth it. Carefully he settled the broken body upon the ground, then stood and nudged her with his foot. She breathed still. He had felt her shuddering gasp for life as he walked. His foot bore down upon a nearly unmarred finger. Zark smiled at the groan of pain that escaped split lips. Kyra's lips. Lips once full and luscious, now cut and bleeding from too many hours of abuse without even water to slake thirst. Turning reluctantly, he climbed a nearby tree to await the arrival of the wolves. The pervasive scent of blood would draw them soon enough. A smile moved across his blood-splattered features. At the forbidden pleasure he would glean. The thought of her anguished screams as the animals tore her apart pushed a shiver of desire through his body. His hands slid down his bare abdomen, creating a shower of dried flakes of blood as he reached to stroke his engorged member. Page 29. Two leather-clad guards rubbed whitened hands together over a low burning brazier, chafing circulation into the pale numbness of their fingers. Last night's cold spell, and the dark blanket of fog rolling in on its footsteps, had settled into their joints, leaving behind a longing for a tankard of ale in front of a blazing fire. The muffled sound of horse hoofs drew their bloodshot eyes northwards. Surprise at how close the travelers had drawn without their notice caused them both to visibly start. Battle-scarred hands automatically reached for swords. A lone figure, cloaked in white linen, rode through the billowing mist towards the raked archway. An arid breeze blew rogue strands of long blonde hair across her face, without disturbing the overlaid loops of elaborate gem-set braids. Her cloak lifted in the gust, allowing muted light to glint off the stitched silver and gold adornment of a noble's simple travel wear. The stalwart soldiers, long hardened to the vast variety of travelers who filtered through the crossing point of the tri-land area, relaxed before moving at a languid pace to attention. Her station in life meant little to them beyond orders that needed to be fulfilled to the letter. Her human beauty was a whole other matter. Mesmerized, they watched as her horse, adorned in glinting ropes of silver chain, moved with stately grace through the arch. Noble-born, definitely noble-born. They shared the thought without realizing. Everything shrieked of that nobility, expensive attire, royal bearing, even the fine features of her face declared the woman one of the chosen few who ruled over the lands. Beautiful, yes, but she didn't need to be. Her every need would be met for the rest of her life. Kyra drew her horse to a stop in front of the men, in full awareness of her appearance. Piercing blue eyes, long aristocratic nose, firm jawline, plucked arching brows, pale peach lips, all delicate aspects of an intricate interweaving of contrived illusion, plucked from the air, her knowledge of the human race and current fashion. Page 30. Even the timing of her arrival at the gate, for when it lay cloaked in billows of drifting fog, was born of an understanding of illusions, familiarity with humans, and their reverence for all things mystical. Her pale Anastasian mare fidgeted, restless, ready to continue on. Kyra's hand moved to stroke the long ropes of its silky mane in a soothing motion. She fumbled through the saddlebag with deliberate slowness, allowing extra time to imprint her face into their memories. Pulling pristine travel parchments from an inner pocket of the bag and pretentiously lifting her chin, she handed them to the stout guard who had stepped forward. They were impeccable, of course. The Red Pelican always had the current version of required papers. Kyra had learned to trust the network of spies who filtered through every city and port in the known lands. To these guards, she was a noble of the highest order. Inwardly, Kyra smirked at the irony. Little did the Red Pelican know how much she deserved the title of nobility, nor how far she had run to escape that despised responsibility. A secret she kept close since the day she left the Freni-Kyn landholdings, not daring to allow other races knowledge of the potential hostage they held within their grasp. After giving the papers a cursory examination, the men waved her on. Kyra nudged her horse forward while the mist swirled up almost mysteriously around her. She moved languidly forward, making sure to leave an indelible memory of a high-born noblewoman traveling from the northwest. Once assured of passing far enough from sight, Kyra let out a breath of relief and guided her horse off the cobbled road into the nearby woods. Not that she couldn't have handled the men, but it would have complicated things. She paused, listening to the early morning bird calls and scrabble of small creatures. Reining her horse towards a rendezvous point, memorized from a hand-drawn guild map the week before, Kyra began changing. Removing a surprisingly lightweight cloak and using a twisting motion along with several hidden fasteners, Kyra flipped it inside out. She laid the now common merchant's cloak across her lap, smoothing the rough fabric to assure its safety from falling. Page 31. This particular cloak had cost the guild a pretty dire. Kyra's lips flickered into a fleeting smile. Her insistence on its purchase, when they started sending her on jobs to impersonate people of importance, had well been worth the hassle of dealing with an incompetent seamstress. The distraction of sparkly metal thread was often all she needed to get into and out of tight spots. She'd fiddled with her clothing, twisting and turning bits and pieces till all the ornamental gold and silver disappeared. Steadily changing appearance, Kyra drew closer to the meeting place. The illusions cloaking her Freni-Kyn features flickered out one by one. Her face, now heart-shaped with high cheekbones, paled noticeably. Nose lost its strong, aristocratic, human aristocracy, reshaping into a classic diminutive line. Average lips turned luscious, full, kissable. Ears lengthened into ruffled points, felon-like eyes slanted mysteriously upward under white, feathery lashes, punctuated with tiny dots. Long, golden, overlapping braids shimmered in glittering fluff. arising to surround her head in a shifting halo of twinkling lights. A perfect crown for the petite, curvaceous Freni-Kyn she'd become. The corset, which had seemed almost loose, now barely contained Kyra's full bust. They'd best be there, Kyra grumbled within as she continued, moving forward. I can't deal with another no-show. One last job, just this one, then I can walk away. She licked her lips in unconscious anticipation of the bittersweet freedom she would enjoy once this job finished. Most of the obligation to her people would be fulfilled, leaving enough to save to start over. Kyra grimaced. Someplace other than the stifling Freni-Kyn landholdings. Slipping from the saddle with well-practiced ease, she pulled her horse to a halt. Kyra's gentle fingers plucked at the bits of twisted silver chain that lay in decorative loops over her patient mare. She stashed the gaudy pieces of ornamental jewelry within one of the pockets of her hunter-green underskirt. Page 32. Loosening the outer skirt, the Freni-Kyn woman let the fabric billow to the ground. It lay, a soft puddle of incongruous light in the dark shadows of the woods. Scooping up the fabric, she ran her fingers under the waistband and hem, checking that all the ornamental stitching lay hidden, a secret. Folding the discarded garment into such a tiny square that it looked like a scrap of rag, she tucked it in with the sparse contents of her bags. A haunted scraping sound caused her ears to reflexively lift upwards and drew her eyes southwards. There they are. She squinted at an isolated campfire, and the black slits of her cat-like pupils narrowed in to observe from a distance. Humans, 3 of them, and about time. It's been hours since I left the road. Her eyes flickered over the surrounding wooded area. Yes, 3. Everything seems as it should. Still, a bit of caution can't hurt. Jade-green eyes searched the clearing as she flipped the catches of her corset open before slipping the pale fabric off. With a deft flip of her wrist, she swung the reversible bodice back around her body, revealing its black brocade side. Kyra paused a moment, waiting for the low, metallic scraping sound coming from the side to sound again, before snapping the latches of her corset closed with a snick. Assured that she hadn't given her position away, she gave her horse an almost apologetic pat. Scooping up handfuls of dark loam, she turned to rubbing the dirt across the mare's pristine hair, creating a less elegant, more ordinary-appearing animal. Satisfied at last that all vestiges of the haughty, noble woman disguise had been hidden, Kyra turned towards the campfire. Shrouded in a thick cloud of dawn mist, she crept forward. 2 veterans, grunts really, obvious warriors, battle-hardened but lacking the deft movements that might pose a threat to a trained assassin. The younger one, though, her eyes shone faint in the shadows of the forest. Winter lay ready to swoop down on soft gray wings, but the deciduous woods, unwilling to release their leaves, remained lush and green, offering her an abundance of dappled hiding places, despite the flickers of light that moved through her hair like out-of-season fireflies. Page 33. Now, her thoughts purred out in pleasure. He has a grace that speaks of more than messenger. Discomfited, she searched for the reason. There's something about him. Kyra studied the man, searching his human face for clues. Average nose, strong, clean-cut jaw, slightly high cheekbones, medium-length flaxen hair. He stiffened, turning in her direction. She crouched lower, attempting to hide behind the brush that separated them. Too late. Dropping the piece of wood he was holding, he began walking towards her hiding spot. The breeze caught his flaxen hair, throwing it forward across his face. With an impatient hand, one too well formed for a simple messenger, he pushed the hair roughly back. Kyra grimaced. My hair! The lights must have betrayed my hiding place. She stood as he neared, every part of him, every move he made, exuding male confidence. Instead of stopping the expected distance, he drew so uncomfortably close that he towered over her, forcing her to look up. Palpable desire sparked between them. Kyra licked suddenly dry lips. The beginning of the code started past her throat, but he cut them short with an unexpected rough tug of her belt. Muscular arms closed around her as she stumbled forward into the warmth of his broad chest. Kyra gave into the longing now coursing through her body like a living entity and lifted hungry lips expectantly. His tongue snaked out to taste the fullness of them before capturing hers in a crushing kiss that stole the breath from her body and left her wanting more. So much more. Their hands tugged at the clothing separating them till the pieces fell one by one to the ground. Standing there now in the forest, bodies nothing but raw hunger, they ran eager fingers over skin long deprived of gratification, drawing out moans of pleasure. A squirrel dropped to the ground near Kyra, and she started. Blinking rapidly at the interruption, she stifled a moan of frustration. Kyron's beard! I'm dreaming up herrings now. My cycle? She counted moons, unconsciously tapping fingers against her legs, then lifted her shoulders in a shrug. Maybe, but mostly the curse of my own imagination, and a distraction I don't need right now, or ever. Page 34. Resisting the urge to pinch herself, a form of self-inflicted injury that had served her well during boring childhood lessons, she resolved herself to stay focused on the job as her eyes narrowed in on the man again. Nothing unusual there, no telltale scars or inks, but handsome, in a human kind of way. Finding no answer to the niggling hint of a warning that edged her consciousness, Kyra moved on to examining his body. Every detail was important, could be the difference between success or disaster. Her trained eyes took in the bloused poet's shirt, an open leather vest, over reasonably broad shoulders, slim hips, plain brown pants, somewhat weather-stained, dark leather boots. All the clothing hung loose and sloppy, as though they hadn't been purchased for his slim form, but absolutely nothing stood out as remarkable. Despite her resolve to stay focused on the job at hand, Kyra's imagination drifted to more gratifying things while staring at the man's physique. She wrapped pale arms around her body, clenching her upper arms in a pinching grip without thinking. Trembling hands drew her attention back to the present again. She snapped her mind back to the task at hand. This won't do at all. Exasperation whipped through her. I shouldn't be getting this easily distracted. Must have miscalculated the time I have left. If I don't take a mate soon, a drawn-out shudder overcame her. The decision of who and when and where will no longer be mine. Cursing herself for breaking a vow to the red pelican, she bit her lip while pressing shaking hands together. I'll be okay. Just have to get home soon. They'll never know. In the meantime, Kyra, keep your mind on business. Her eyes drifted to the flaxen-haired male. And off men. As the human leaned forward to add more wood to the fire, pale blonde hair fell across his face, revealing the slight point of a half-Ravel ear. She let out a breath of relief. Ah, there we have it, a half-breed. Page 35. It made sense. Refused a place in his parents' world, some misbegotten, cast-off creation of a fleeting night's passion. Illegal even in most places. Taken in by the Assassin's Guild, maybe even raised from birth, as they oft did with society's outcasts. The misbreeds, as some called them. A definite advantage to the Red Pelican. No one to answer to if something went wrong, and who could be more loyal than one reared by the Guild itself? He moves with poise, though. Her thoughts simmered with appreciative admiration. From the Fravel side, no doubt. She crouched, watching in absolute perfect stillness, broken only by the random shimmers of light that touched the tips of her hair. A playful autumn breeze picked up, stirring the liquid dandelion fluff of her hair that floated about her head, and taking with it a few bits of light. Lifting an impatient hand, Kyra pushed it back from her eyes before drawing a deep, thoughtful breath and moving forward. She slipped a simple nice ring on while circling the campsite. Her medium-length hair gradually darkened into a floating deep mass of deep brown, while the lights winked out one by one. Tarek added yet another fresh-cut log to the fire, then rubbed sticky fingertips down over his breeches, wiping away a clinging coat of stubborn sap. Picking up a brown woven cloak that lay thrown across the woodpile, he swirled it onto his shoulders, unconsciously mimicking the graceful motions of a dancer. He glanced at the overcast sky, attempting to somehow part the murk and clearly see the elusive sun. Daybreak had come and gone, yet the chill of night hung upon the land. How long have we waited? Our contact should be here by now. He tried shaking off the feeling of foreboding gloom which shrouded thick and heavy, smothering close around his body. Page 36. Impossible to dispense with, it embraced him even harder, as though belonging to that day. To him, change is coming. He sensed the turning of paths as surely as though they lay before him. Desperate for distraction, a long drawn-out litany of mental complaints erupted from Tarek. Kyron, how I despise this job, and this one's worse than all the others rolled into one. What a relief it'll be when it's over. Time for a break. I'll go somewhere, and they'll let me too. I'm long overdue. He rubbed calloused hands together over the rejuvenating flames which burst upwards in a crackling, hissing mass encompassing the new log. Somewhere warm. I'll go somewhere warm. See anyone yet? He called out to his mercenary companions. He should be here by now. The guards turned uncaring eyes towards him before returning to the task of sharpening blades, creating long, drawn-out scraping sounds that echoed through the dense woods. Nope, one grunted with a languid slide of a whetstone down his sword. Maybe he's not coming. His voice trailed off at the implications. Tarek shuddered with dread at the forlorn noise that seemed only to add to the dismal day. He could tell them to stop, he knew that. But what right had he to rob them of the comfort a familiar task afforded? We should move on. The darker of the two hurried to put away his belongings. We've waited all night. No, Tarek spoke in terse authority. We wait. Orders. The muffled thump of horse hooves sounding from the wrong direction sent electric tingles of alarm racing through his well-muscled body. With urgent movements, Tarek drew a battle-worn sword, instinctively responding to the raw sound of a weapon being drawn. The guards spread out. Tarek glanced at the men as they moved in the wrong direction and barely contained a grunt of disgust before turning toward the nearing sound. His ears strained to pull more hints as to the identity of the newcomer from the concealing woods. One rider on an unburdened horse, he decided. A stray breeze lifted the fog, revealing the source of the sound. One solitary Freni-Kyn girl-child riding a horse too big for her small frame. The unlit fluff of dark brown hair and exotic cast of features gave away her racial heritage, as well as clues to her age. Tension drained from tight muscles. False alarm. Lost, most likely. I'll take care of this, he told his protectors. With impatient grunts, they returned to the warmth of the fire while he moved to intercept the child. His eyes took in the fine bones of the horse, despite the filth that it was a well-bred beast. I can't believe this is happening. He gave himself an internal shake as she rode closer. Of all the times for some wisp of a child to show up, she'll have to find a different fire. There's no help for it. This is no place for a youngling. The unsure smile that flitted across the child's face nearly disarmed him as he stared up into wide green eyes. Hello, she chirruped. What are you doing out here alone? His voice turned gruff with very real concern. Tarek grimaced at how young she was, nearly flat-chested, with hair too short to even have come of age. She slipped from the mare with kite-like grace in the firelight. I saw the fire. Her voice sounded sweetly naive, a breath of clean air on such an ominous day. You can't stay here. He brusquely placed his body between her and the flames she was so obviously drawn to. At the question in her large green eyes, he scowled, trying to appear threatening. It's dangerous. But her voice trailed off as she glanced over her shoulder into the fog. Her eyes took on an even wider look of dawning awareness. Page 38. Seeing the fright mirrored there, Tarek stilled himself to hear some forlorn story. His gaze shifted to her gaze shifted to his own golden eyes. Tarek noted the subtle alteration of the way she carried herself, the flexing of her knees as though prepared to spring, the widening of her pupils into pools of darkness till she resembled an animal poised to strike. Memories of horror stories about creatures said to roam this territory came rushing to the forefront of his mind. Despite immediate dismissal of the notion as a piece of fanciful fiction, he repressed a shudder. The silence drew out. Tarek stiffened at the palpable menace emanating from the girl. His hand settled uneasily on the hilt of his sword. My dog ran away across the lake. The code words dropped from Petal's soft lips like a crack of lightning in the silence before a storm. I'm sure you can draw him back with a spot of fresh meat, despite his training. Astonishment stole over Tarek's face. But I have done. She savored the bewilderment reflected in his eyes. Her own lost the wild look they had momentarily held, returning to sweet innocence. Then perhaps some jerky will do. He finished off the code phrases. Aftershock resonated through Tarek, glass thrown against metal. You're a girl child, Tarek blurted out in disparagement. Jerking a slender packet from his leather vest, he passed it to her. How was this tiny thing supposed to take out a grown man? A grown man in a guarded palace, his angry thoughts stuttered out. For the first time since joining the guild, someone had made a grievous mistake. They'd assigned the wrong person to this mission. His part was taking on new levels of distastefulness by the moment. Now, on top of everything else in the whole disgusting mess, a child was destined to die. Page 39. Pulling soft leather gloves from her hand in near slow motion, she revealed delicate fingers adorned with a single ring of pitted black metal. In a burst of movement, her hand shot forward, plucking the packet from his outstretched palm. Tarek started. Damn, she's fast. Still wearing her child illusion, Kyra, unconcerned, turned her back on him. Walking to the fire, she deftly slipped open the oilskin envelope. 2 small packets slid into a waiting hand to be secreted within her bodice. The guards looked elsewhere, anywhere but at the girl, neither of them wanting the type of early retirement awaiting people who got too curious in this business. After reading the enclosed envelope, she watched it drop and burn to ash in the fire before turning towards Tarek. Are you sure you can handle this? He muttered. Doubt furrowed his forehead into lines of worry. She's too young to die. Maybe I can talk her out of going. It's not too late. If she doesn't go, then I won't have to. Kyra's heart-shaped face cocked sideways, causing her dark hair to sway in a playful manner, and confirming his belief that the choice of a child had to be an error. Can I handle this? She challenged with such a queerly intense gaze that he found himself looking away. When he looked again, she had vanished. Can you? The hair on the back of his neck lifted in warning at the menacing whisper from behind. And that ends the first chapter of Foretold, Betrayed by Desire.